All of my presentations, I post them up on GitHub. What I really like about that is at any time, somebody can go download the zip file and get all of the files as a download. I don't have to maintain separate links for it. And I was working on this at probably, 15 hours ago, so like 4 in the morning. I was making my last minute updates, and you're able to, pull them down before the meeting. So that's what we got there. And then tons of content on my website. I am recording and streaming this session. So I guess, yeah, I suppose I'll thank my sponsors for tonight. So like Sapien, we talked about them a little bit earlier. Like they've got a new version of their Sapien Studio, like 2019 was just released. A lot of new features there. And they've also released a module manager. So if you're having issues in this module nightmare, they've got a nice GUI around it for like getting the latest one, cleaning out old modules, refreshing sessions. So I just kind of skimming the change set the other day, so it looks interesting.
It is.
And then my other sponsor is Loan Depot for the facility. Like they let us host this group here every month. So being the first Tuesday of the month, they've given us kind of free access to the resources here. So I'll thank them for that. And then with that, I guess let's jump into Pester. And so first off, I want to start by saying that the Pester wiki off of their GitHub page is actually a really good guide. They got lots of, it's pretty well documented. So what Pester is, it was developed as a unit testing framework. The idea was as you write functions in PowerShell, this is the tool set you would use for writing the tests for your functions. It's actually gotten quite mature. This is the first, I believe it's the first open source product that Microsoft has shipped with an operating system. So your Windows 10 and your Server 2012 R2 come with a version of Pester pre-installed. So it's kind of like positioned itself as like the standard for testing. And then I suppose like you can easily write scripts to test your own scripts. But what Pester offers and brings to the table is some friendly sets of commands that speak towards testing. And it kind of builds in the reporting and the analysis. So you don't always have to write the logic like, if this failed, what message do I present? Like some of the commands I have kind of offer some built-in messaging. And I'll show you those as we kind of step into it. And while it started, hey, welcome. While it started as a unit testing framework, people are using it for like operational validation to test the state of their servers and systems. And I've even used it for more of a keeping myself honest. Like I have checks and balances on my own code that aren't testing the code itself, but testing, do I have a strict analyzer rule? So does it pass them all? Do I have help and comments and things like that? So let's get our eyes on some Pester code. All right, so I think that might be the size I want. So Pester is written as a DSL, a domain-specific language. And that means is they've added terminology and keywords very specific to testing that hopefully makes it more intuitive once you kind of get your mind wrapped around it. And they break stuff into this, like you describe what it is you're testing. Like this here is like a generic test. And within this describe block, I can have several commands that says, it has the value, actual value. And then I'm basically doing the test of that using this should be syntax. Coming from another language, it can be referred to as assertions. Like I assert this is this way, I assert this is true or this is false. Pester uses the should be, should not be type syntax. So if I run this most basic test, we'll see that, oh no, I can't zoom in down there. Not only did my test pass, it built this little formatting report around the commands I wrote up above. The generic test, is it this one? Oh. The generic test becomes what it describes, the describe block, and then the it statement is each line that gets tested. So as I go to peek at some more examples. So the should operator, you'll get super comfortable familiar with him. And here's a case where the should be, like I have the should be actual value, which is like I had in my previous demo. And you can also do the should not be as a way to do the reverse, the negative of a specific test. But there's many more. There's be exactly. So if case matters, you can say make it exactly this. By default, it'll let you do mixed case and not worry about it.
And it's type. It'll check type too, I think.
Oh yeah, all kinds of wonderful options. Like I said, this demo, I have comments in here of examples of the failed tests, effectively. So if you want to work through this later on your own, you kind of see what things would pass or fail. So it should be exactly. And should exist, like you can specify a file path, and the should exist will tell you like a test path. Is it there or not? Nice simple syntax for that. The file content match. This will like check the contents of the file. Oh, I think I need to. So I actually have one plugin that pops up quite often I got to disable, but I think I've got them off this time. Yeah. And the special note is that the file content match uses a regex. So if you need any odd pattern, you can drop that in there for it to find it. Contains exactly, just like previously, you can do exact matches within the file. Then should match allows you to do regex with just generic strings. So while the file contents is looking at files, your should match is looking at strings and other values.
You said that match can be regex as well.
Yes, and this can also be a regex.
Okay.
If I drop in, say.
So like V is like a string, or it's a generic object comparison match only regex. Like the match operator.
Value. I think that's all regex. I don't know. I'm going on the fly here. I shouldn't do that. Then
Regex on the fly is
yeah, regex is one of those, it's either your best friend or your worst enemy. You know, there's times where it's just the exact thing you need. And yeah. Although I'm generally pretty lazy with my regex, you know, I do a lot of this, hey, this dot star for everything, you know? I grab the pattern, I dot star what I don't care about, and hopefully that matches exactly what I need. Match exactly, so regex for case sensitive. And then you can even decide if your code should throw or not. So you have a lot of scenarios where you actually want to test the error conditions. So you'll introduce values or properties and say, when I do this, I should throw an exception. There's even parameters that would let you specify the type of an exception it should throw. So this one should say file not found, or out of bounds, whatever those values are. You could leverage the throw to do that. While I show it on here as this should not throw, this is actually redundant in that all lines should not throw an exception unless you say it should throw. So, so this is truly identical to this. And this is actually the recommended way to do the should not throw anymore. Just call the command. If it throws, Pester will detect the error and it'll bubble up the problems for you. I used to wrap my stuff and do those tests very explicitly before, but the best practice recommendation is you don't need to do that because nothing should throw.
The line above the script block is the same.
Yeah. So line 49 and line 50 are effectively the same thing. Because line 50, if he throws, it's going to make the test fail either way.
Right.
Let's say correct way to handle this scenario. I'll get to my demo. And then they have special commands for the null and empty checks, right? So you'll have commands that you actually expect no results back in these scenarios. So the should be null or empty or not be null or empty are kind of very go-to. And in fact, quite often, I will start many of my tests with a, let me call a function, get a result. My first thing is, it should not be null or empty. Then I move on to specific tests about the properties of it. Because if it's null or empty, I know everything else is going to fail. And it tells me right away what my problem was. And there's actually a whole range of options. They've got should be true, should be false, have a count, less than, greater than, be of certain types. So thankfully, we get good argument completion on these to kind of auto-find some of these, like 5 should be, and kind of walk the list to find what you're looking for. I will say that if you're looking at some older Pester tests, they use a syntax of just, they use a syntax where you actually didn't need the dash. So I'll say before 4.0, you actually wouldn't use the dashes for any of these parameters. And it was just doing magic behind the scenes to figure out what you intended. And I think they flipped to actual parameters to make it easier for them to test and validation the dev side of things. Like they're super friendly for the end user for the shorter syntax, but to do some of the more advanced features like the parameter sets effectively, they had to have real parameters there to do that. And I'm going to shut this door now.
Best practice to upgrade.
Yes, I would. So they work hard to keep backwards compatibility. So I think even the current versions of Pester still support PowerShell 2.0. I think they've committed to supporting it until, God, what was it? There's something, I think till like Windows 7 truly gets end of life. I just saw a thread about it the other day, but yeah, they're still supporting 2.0, which means that the built-in version will do a pretty good job. There are some nice new features, which I will step into some of them, and I'll point them out when I see them. And I think some of these, like the have counts, be true or false, or be less than, are of the newer version. I couldn't tell you when those options were introduced. Now, it's just as easy, right, using the new syntax for this, but you easily could have had just the counts should be 4, right? Like that's what I had in my scripts before. So it's easy to kind of step back and forth, but we're trying to make it more clean, I guess. So that's a good variety of the should options. And if I run that test, get my test results back up here. And then we invoke Pester, you invoke Pester, and if you give it a path to a test, it'll run all the tests in it. And so if I run this, all of those pass. Now, what I love, the reason I'm showing this as well is talking about the reporting, the built-in features. Not only did it show me everything that passed, it told me how long each test took. It gave me a nice summary at the end of exactly how many were passed or failed. If there were tests that were like skipped or marked as pending, those would be rolled up in here as well. In fact, let me go ahead and show those since I don't have them anywhere else in my demo. So you can take tests, like say more options. Let's say if I know I need more work on this, I can just mark this guy as pending. Or in the case where you change something that's broken right now, I kind of need to get things passing my tests, so I'll mark this as pending to come back and fix later. Sometimes, oh, why? There you go. So that's the pending option. It's a switch. But there's also.
Does it actually solo run the tests still, or?
It won't run. It will not run the tests.
Oh, okay.
And if I do this, so I'm going to just put these in here to see what the output, how the output changes.
Yeah.
So this bottom one is pending. It has no idea what to do, but it's question mark, different color, right? And my pending count came up. There's also, I slipped in there a skip flag as well. And I marked this guy as an exclamation point saying, I skipped this one. You may have intended to run it. Scenarios where I use the skip might be if maybe it's a more complex test that requires some like environment setup. If I can check that the environment's not set up that way, I can auto skip stuff. So what I mean by that is if I just have some variable that tells me skip all equals true, and then I could do skip, because this is a switch. Skip all. Yeah. All right. Oh, that's weird on my screen. So I run this now. Like the idea is that you could programmatically decide up above, should I skip the set of tests? Like I had a DSC resource that was doing SFTP type work, right? It was downloading files from an SFTP server. In my local testing, I fired up a local instance of SFTP. So my test would check to see if it was running or not. If it was running, it'd run the tests. If it wasn't, it would skip the tests. And that way, locally, I could do all my testing validation. On my build agent, I'm not running that, but I felt confident enough that I could still check it in and let it decide to skip some tests for the build agent. So that's a scenario where I've used the skip. But let me turn this stuff back out. So other features of Pester. So I just focused on the should operator, but we have options to add, actually call it context. So maybe describing the generic test is too big of a grouping, too big of an envelope or bucket. I could have sub-buckets called contexts. And so I could be testing one thing actually in the context of, quite often I'll have a context that's like the happy path, effectively, right? This context, everything I expect should pass. Then the context is, oh, hey, I got this scenario where this specific thing is broken or missing or having weird whatever. I might group that stuff together and have all those as one bucket. Other times, or if I'm doing, like different sets of data, basically it's another sub bucket for bucketing your tests. And if I run this, it'll actually.
It's more like integration tests, like in this business case, whatever these things should have.
Yeah, so like here, my describe, here's my context. So every context will get its own section with the it block sliding under it. It's completely optional. I I will say that the it statement has to run inside either a context or a describe block. Right? Like they built in logic to check for that. So I can't just run, as I couldn't before, just that section of code. I got to run the whole describe. And the thing you'll notice is that when I run the describe interactively here, like I'm doing in the demo, I do not get the summary at the end. Like I'm executing the describe block, but it's not doing any aggregation of the totals. Exactly. Is the invoke Pester himself? It's that higher layer of a wrapper that's doing more of the housekeeping, if you will, for it. All right, other features. Okay, so there's my context. Another feature that's fairly new with 4.0 is the because statement. So, so let me show the failures here without that. No, don't run that. Don't run that. I run F8 now. Just because let's be something else so it can fail. I haven't shown any failure then, have I? So these should operators know they should be the same, but they're different. So it's already giving me that message. Like it's in this nice friendly message saying, hey, these are different and I expected them to be the same. Then also showed me the two values, what I expected and what the actual value was. Sometimes, like I said, you might want a different description or additional information. And so now it says, I expected them to be the same because I said so, but they were different. So I still get the friendly messaging, but I can add those additional tips in there that if I had like 1,000 tests, right, I might give specific reasons why these values should be the same or not. Let me see if I have a better example of that. So here's another scenario where as soon as you hit a should that fails, the whole test is failed and it stops executing them. So here's a scenario where there's 3 tests that I might be expecting to run. If I don't know if they're too similar, the because becomes my differentiator, I guess. So let me run this guy, because right now, I'm expecting this to fail someplace. I have no idea which one's going to fail. So I'm using some random numbers in here, right? So if I run this again, and I fail in the first one. Let me see if I can get it to fail in the middle somewhere, just so we see some assumption, 50-50. Whew, they all passed. What are the odds of that one? 1 in... Huh. All right. So here's where it failed on the main test case, and I know that because my because statement tells me so, right? Because when they're all identical without the because, they just say this should have been this, and I might actually have scenarios where I'm doing some tests at the very beginning, in the middle, and the end that might actually have the same line of Pester in all of those. But I need a little bit of a differentiator of when it failed, because if something fails in the prep step, that gives me more information or different information than it fails like a cleanup step. Like I know I did the REST call, I got an object back, and then something happened here. Or the REST call, I had no information to begin with. And it helps you narrow in on your troubleshooting faster. I can't say I use this very often, but I'm very thankful for the places where I need to use it that I have that. Temporary. So another feature of Pester is they give you an automatic test drive. So when you run the tests, it creates a folder, like a magic workspace in a temp folder someplace. So you can do some file work and let it clean up after you're done. So instead of in your tests, like, creating a file on a spot, and when it fails, having to do something else to make sure you clean up that file, even if it failed, like Pester knows to do his own housekeeping in those cases. So In this case, the test drive, I can set content, and it should match the temp value. So running this, it contains the value. So like I said, but this test drive also only exists inside the Pester tests.
Oh, specific.
Yeah.
That's right.
So the name is specific, and also it does make it a little bit of nuance if you're trying to debug something and you're trying to run each line one at a time outside of your Pester tests. That I like to set the test drive value path to a variable and then use it on like the next line. That way, if I have to basically stake that, right? If I'm just gonna run here and something went wrong and I want to run just this line, all I have to do is define path, and I'm kind of good. I kind of pick up where I want it. Let's see here. Other fun features that Pester gives us is the ability to do before each, right? So if I have, let's say, 2 different tests that are doing stuff to the file. So I try to get this all on the same string here. I want to make sure that one test, I want to reset my state between the tests, right? Like if I have one test that sets the file and contents, I don't want my next test to fail because that one messed it up. So you can do like a before each test, set this to a known state, and then each test itself can depend on that known state and just run with it. So running this guy here, they both succeed even though this guy is literally changing the file and not cleaning up after himself. He's just setting it and forgetting it, and he could care less what the other tests are doing. And we actually have lots of options here. So I said before each, I actually have a before all. So this could be like a true environment setup, like let me pull a credential out of the vault, right? Let me set a variable once in my before all. Before each, we'll do that each test setup. If you actually need a cleanup for each test, we have after each. Or cleanup overall is like an after all.
Where do you put the before all and before each? In each describe block, or?
You can do them in each describe block, and I have to test this, but I think you can do it again in each context block. So I think you can have a describe before all and a context before each or before all.
Okay.
I think I'll have to test that, but I think you can do it that way. So let me run this block here, just kind of generate some output. And so we can kind of see how stuff executed where I thought it should. And you'll also notice that even if this test failed when it was executing here, the after each still happened, right? So when I'm at cleanup scenarios, like I know I actually do lock a file, I need to free up the lock, or I lock an account, I need to unlock it, like a scenario where you always need to leave it in a good state. The after each and after all are intended to always execute. So it's almost as if you're doing like a try, catch, or try finally, right? Where you're trying this, if it fails, do this finally. I used to do that in my tests because I need to fix certain states if they failed, until I realized that, oh, no. After each will actually run if my test fails or not. And you notice it actually ran my after each before it reported the status of that test as failing. And then on to test cases. So sometimes you have like one common test, but the data needs to change for each run of it. So there's actually 2 ways. There's 2 ways I like to do this with Pester. And this is where I get to point out and remind you that, in a way, these Pester commands are just PowerShell functions, okay? So if I look at this first example here, where I create some test cases for aliases and the corresponding command, I can put PowerShell in here wherever I want, including like a for each loop. So I can actually for each over data and call my it inline. Actually, I thought I used to have it in here, but this is just a function. This is just a function, right? I'm doing this weird thing with these script blocks to kind of do this these nesting levels, but this is literally just a script block that's hanging on the line. If you accidentally drop the brace down, it's not going to work. Like it's one of those. It's no longer a parameter to the describe. You actually have a describe command and a script block that are on the second line. I think though, if we run this, it will actually kind of remind you that, have you put the open curly brace on the next line?
You can backtick and escape it though if you run out of it about the format.
For people that have the debates of, on your, so the forever code debate, right? You're doing an if statement. Is a curly brace on the same line or in the line below? One of the arguments in the PowerShell community for keeping it on the same line is that when people are doing DSLs, they have to have it on the same line. And that's one layer of like consistency that you can have across your code. I bring it down. Yep, I do. So my counter to that is I tend to add a blank space between these as if it was down there, and I kind of get that visual breakup. We could do, I suppose, talking on a different tangent, we could do a session on like a round table, but we can run through like best practices and get people like fighting for each side or talk about why they feel one or the other. I've done that in a previous group before, and I think it turned out really well. Yeah, we might have to put that on the schedule somewhere. I like that. That's right. That'd be a good conversation piece, right? Like, so sometimes you come in with your own style guides. There is, Joel Bennett manages like a community style guide. Yeah. But there's a style guide with the DSC resource kit. Actually, my coding style aligns more with the style guidelines of that than it does with what Joel Bennett's put out. I mean, he's absolutely right on a lot of things, but there's some general nuances that I just really like. I got my reason. That's really be a good thing for me to go down and talk. So, being this is just PowerShell, I can for each iterate whatever kind of PowerShell commands you want to run in here between these functions. But as far as test cases go, Pester has a special built-in syntax just for that. You can, on your it statement, provide as a parameter the test cases that you want to run, and it will do the loop for you. So, the important things to know is that the parameters here, so I formatted these test cases this way very intentionally. And this is an array of hash tables, okay? So this array is my collection, and the hash tables, it's important that they're hash tables because what Pester is really doing under the covers is for each one of these, they're calling this script block, that's all it really is, and splatting your hash table to it. And what that basically means is it's leveraging a built-in PowerShell feature to map the parameters to these parameters without them having to actually do any logic themselves. And once they're splatted in, we can execute these test cases, and you'll see that it runs. Not only does it run for each, I gotta load my values. It runs for each one. And it also has its own built-in templating for the string. So these braces are very intentional this way for it to find its own token replacement for the alias and command parameters.
And those parameter names have
I'm just gonna say yes. I think there's some weird nuances where you can probably get away without it, but I would keep them consistent. So these absolutely have to match. I think there's some weird PowerShell nuances we can get away with these not quite matching. But it's best to make everything match. Okay, so test cases. And quite often I'll have like one set of test cases in different it blocks that iterate over them like slightly differently. And I also use this pattern quite often, where I also have what my output, my expected result should be as part of the test case. So here I'm saying this alias PS should give me get processed as the result. So not only like giving it data that should pass, but it self-validates. And now it becomes super easy to add more test cases. What DMI, get DMI object. Yeah, so it's super easy to add more test cases in this collection. Okay, in module scope. If you're doing module work with Pester, and quite often they go hand in hand. Like as you step into modules, the value of having good tests go super hand in hand. And a common pattern with modules is you'll have some functions that are public, exposed that people can call, but you'll have others that are like internal to your module that nobody can call. So in order to reach into your module and call those functions and commands, they actually provide a in-module scope. So I say inside the module, in this case, Pester, run this test. And so what I'm looking for here is, if I run just this by itself, this is going to fail because this variable is not defined in my session. But I happen to know that that's a variable that's used by Pester inside of itself. Weird reasons, but so if I say inside the module Pester, run this describe, and he executes this time, he actually found that variable defined with values in it, because inside that scope of Pester, it's there. So I'll have my public functions with their tests, and even all my private functions I use in module scope to test my private functions. There is another pattern, I guess, that I've seen people do where they might place the tests like next to each function, and running the test will just import the function directly. So it's cheating because it's not even building the module, it's just calling the function, loading it, and then running the test against it. But my counter argument to that is you really should be testing what you're shipping. So if you're testing something that way, but you're doing like a module build, you're doing something more complex with your module, like the common patterns tend to do. Like the common pattern is all your functions are separate files in source, but when you build, you basically grab everything, concatenate it, dump it into a module, and then you make a list of things that should be public. And so it really should be that module should be built and loaded and then tested. And that's where that in-module scope becomes really valuable. So from there, mocking. So mocking is a really advanced feature, if you will, that lets you fake function calls, right? Like if I have code that's calling getDate to do something, I don't actually need to test that getDate works. I trust that that module author owner PowerShell has validated that getDate does what it's supposed to do. But I might need very consistent values in my tests to be able to validate what the output should be. So I might have something that actually internally gets the date and creates like a file path or a file name or some token. And if I need it to be a very consistent token created every time, and I know it depends on the dates, I can mock the get date to return a very specific date. So my tests will pass every time, all the time, in a nice, consistent way. And built into Pester is a assert mock called that checks to see that this was called 2 times. So if my token logic, I know it should only call the date get what date once, I can assert that it only called the get date once. And if that fails, I got a weird loop or something happening that I didn't expect. This is a very simple example, but if you start pushing to get good test coverage, you'll find yourself mocking quite a bit of stuff. And don't think you always have to mock just the known good values. Sometimes you can mock a function, just have it throw an exception, right? Because if I'm always giving a set date, I'm never testing the case where get date doesn't actually return me a value. I don't know when it would throw an exception, specifically get date, but you could make that a mock get date throw exception, and now my code has tested that error condition. So sometimes my mocks are there just to create exceptions and errors to see how my code is handling it.
Where would you put the throw? Is that Swift block or is
Yeah, so in this case,
parameter?
I would just put the throw here, I found or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And now these will all fail. And then the pattern would be I'd wrap these in, this should throw, right? Or not throw, right? I mean, I'd let it handle it appropriately. So I know I'm showing get date directly here, but the use case is usually your function is calling something else. I need to mock that something else. It's tests to say like, you're doing like a get my object, right? Give me something from this server, this system, and my test is doing, my code is doing something around that. If I can't reliably get data from the system, I can mock that with set known objects.
I find that's been helpful when my functions rely on internet access. Yeah, I can see what they must do.
Yep.
Or you get like installations from the machine itself. I don't want to like uninstall and install something all the time.
Absolutely. So I mock like invoke REST method quite a bit, right? Like I don't need to know the invoke REST method. I don't need to test that. I need to test that my code is working with it correctly. So, so I'm not going to deep dive into mock too much here, but it does support like parameter filters, such that if you call your mock with different parameters, you can actually have it give different values or only mock when certain parameters are provided. So you can almost do like a mock when it's this URI, give me this specific result back, but let the others kind of pass through. And then on the notion of like web requests, what I'll often do in my tests is have a folder called data that I have just common data sets that I'm using. And on occasion, I have like in a valid session, done my invoke web request, got an object, exported as CLI XML, and then my mock imports that CLI XML. So I get a rich object and returns that every single time. So it's just like that get date scenario, but a little bit more robust data. And that usually is sufficient for most of the scenarios where I need it. I don't know if you've used that much, if ever, but the invoke web request URI. Let's just do basic parsing, export CLI XML path test types. So if I run this and I do code on this test, so the export CLI XML import takes this rich object, saves it to disk, and lets you like rehydrate it, right? It was never intended for you to look at it. So it's gonna look really ugly when I pop this guy up. So like some of it's the actual content, but it's doing tokenization skip, sure. My collapsing's not working right. But so it's got this, it's typing stuff, like it's doing very explicit things so it can rehydrate it as a PowerShell object. Like I say, you're never intended to come in here and look at this, but there's tons of information there that PowerShell can leverage. If it was something that I was going to edit or modify later, I'd probably save it as JSON and pull it back out. Sometimes that's convert to JSON, convert from JSON as you save to and from disk. Sometimes that's enough of a hydration or dehydration to get most tests to pass. But using the CLI XML has been has saved me a couple times. Especially if I don't care what it is, I just need a consistent, this is the results I can test against. We do a lot of stuff against Jira. So I don't want to be hitting my live Jira every time I'm running a test. So I'll run through a set, save some Jira queries results, and then mock around those. So I think that's up there. Okay, so let's look at some more tests in action here. So I have a simple script, like something you might have written where you're like executing and creating a desktop shortcut. You know, kind of my example I was using from last month, but more in the idea like, here's the script to start with. How would you write a test for it? So this guy's taking a couple parameters, creating an object, using this special WScript shell object. It's calling create shortcut with this parameter, assigning the path, and then saving it. This just works. If I run this, he is on my desktop, created a shortcut to Notepad right here. But I don't want to have to look at that every time I run this, right? Like I should be able to say, did the shortcut get created or not? So starting with the most basic of tests, I am doing some fancy scaffolding here just to make sure that I can get the path of the script I'm testing. This is a scenario where my test sits next to the script every single time. I used to do this quite a bit more. I've shifted more to tests being in their own folders away from the code because I'm doing more of a module pattern. But when I used to have like a toolkit script folder where I had, here's all my scripts, and I was writing tests for them, I'd name the test the same as the file with the .tests. So they'd be kind of paired effectively. And one of the most common tests I would drop in everything is this copy paste chunk of code that imports the file and checks, is this valid PowerShell? So if I drop a semicolon or a bracket or something and I save it, my test before I do anything else will tell me I screwed up my PowerShell file. Go fix that first. Or at least it'll be a failed test in the list. Like I like to get the most common, the simplest things tested early and out of the way to save myself headache later when stuff's failing and it just didn't load to begin with. And then the actual test is, I'm running the test, I'm invoking that file in this case, and I'm checking to see that this file is on the desktop. So did I delete that file? I did. Let me delete it because I'm not doing any cleanup in this script. We're pretty bare bones right here. Line 4. So here is this variable plus this variable.
Right there. I'm sorry. I didn't.
Nope, that's about right. So oddly, I've copied and pasted this from other PowerShell Pester scripts.
Yeah.
So I've seen that quite a bit. I don't know what soot is short for. Like
I just substitute.
Substitute.
Maybe.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because there's a it'll create the test file and the PowerShell replacing the PS file.
Yeah.
The same name with .test in the middle.
Okay.
And that's what it's doing. It's saying, okay, I'm here now. Substitute. Take out the .test part of it, and that's the PowerShell
Okay. Yeah, like I said, I've gotten pretty cookie cutter as of late, but yeah, that's probably exactly where I pulled that line from. So here, like, just to walk through this, right? I'm getting my invocation current path tells me where I'm at, or the path to my script, so I can get the folder. But then I'm actually asking my current script, I'm getting the leaf, so I get the file name, and then I'm calling a replace on it because I'm always calling everything with tests. So I'm basically replacing out tests to know what I intend to be testing with this script. Quite often, I didn't do it here, but I probably should have. I might put in something here that says file. So I like to have my describe tell me in the line what it is I'm testing. Especially with VS Code, if you put in a full file path for output, you can click to it. To a failed test and put in the full path there, you can click on that comment, and that file will open up for you to edit and test. So that's something I've started doing more and more as of late, is working in full file paths to things that are running or being tested. So let me save this. Let me go back to my demo, because I think I executed the Pester here. That ran, and just tell me, hey, it's valid PowerShell. I create a shortcut on the desktop. So as we start shifting into advanced functions, right, like continuing from our talk from last month, we start doing things where we're taking parameters now. Like this is a script that's taking parameters. So now it's a very generic tool for saving shortcuts, which means my tests need to get a little bit more advanced and kind of do the same thing. But this also allows me to choose my same scaffolding, my same is valid test. So I'm going to collapse that for now. So now I want to actually create shortcuts. So here I'm checking my test drive to make sure these shortcuts don't already exist. So I'm almost like pre-testing, like, okay, let me get my known state. I have no shortcuts or temporary files. I then do a set content to create a file, which is just a text document in this case. And then I'm calling this other script and giving it a source and destination of test drive. I'll come back to him in just a second. And then I can actually test that this exists. Now, I didn't mention this guy earlier. This test drive is a second variable that actually gives you the full path on your system to where this test drive lives. And I had to use it in this case because that comma object I was using before to do this new shortcut here and here, he doesn't understand PowerShell drives. So if I actually give him a PowerShell drive, he's just going to blow up anyways. So then I'm able to actually leverage this test drive variable, which gives me the full path into my program files, the temp folder. It's a GUID, and I see the full path. So if you do need to work around that test drive, this is the variable that does it. So now we run this guy. He's working out of my test drive. And I can actually run him multiple times. Because he's using the test drive, he gets a fresh location every time. The issue with my previous test was I was checking the desktop. Well, maybe I ran the script before and it's already there. Like I didn't ever know if I had a good, clean starting state for my tests. Yeah. So I think it's really important with your testing is always try to be like, you're going to know good states. And that's where that before all that test drive comes in handy is, let me set up my environment consistently the same way every time. And that's why I'll even validate, that's why, I literally checked for, these should not exist because later on I'm going to create those. If for some reason those did exist, I want it to fail to figure out what's wrong with my test and not me thinking my code is wrong. I got to chase my code for a little bit, figuring out why did my test fail. This might be a good scenario to use because We should not exist yet. Just so that when stuff succeeds later, or if I run the same test multiple times, it's very clear to me. Okay, so that one ran beautifully. We can get even more fancy, or more complex, I guess. Close to the right. Okay, so same scaffolding above. Is it valid? Yes. And here's a scenario where I'm doing the before all, where how am I doing that? I'm loading the file. I feel like these two are redundant. I think, yeah, they are. The same thing. So here I'm loading the function in memory. Oh, so wait, I missed something. In this scenario, I turn them into a function. That's what I'm doing different here. So instead of just a script with parameters, I'm doing an advanced function with all the parameters and has built-in validation, right? Which means I need to first load the function. So my before all in this case is loading it in memory. I'm creating a file in the test drive. And in this case, I'm actually pre-creating a shortcut. And oh, I did. Thank you. Thank you. I should know better than mess with my demos. I've learned through my demos, and I already broke it once tonight, was like every line I have in my demo, I need to run because it's something I'm loading or executing later on. Like I definitely will do dependencies. So if you're running my demos at home, run every line through the thing because quite often I have stuff set up for some later follow-up examples. And so you're right, yes, I'm loading my get shortcut because get is what I'm testing. New shortcut creates a shortcut. So I've shifted in this case to testing the getting commands, right? And just by looking at this, so I'm calling the new shortcut, so I'm not testing that, to prep my environment. So before all, and really this should probably be like a before each, but actually this should be before all, these two things should be in a before each, but I'll leave that tangent alone. So and this is a scenario where I'm testing two separate things, right? Can I open a shortcut from a file info object, which means I'm
passing dollars in shortcut.
So shortcut, my new shortcut creates a shortcut and returns a file info object is the assumptions I'm making in this script here, right? So new shortcut gives me an object to play with. I'm calling get shortcut off of this path, and he finds it appropriately, or I can call get shortcut off of the full name to the path. So basically I'm testing, did the logic internal of this module handle both those scenarios appropriately? If I wanted to look at my logic in there, I think I'm doing this resolve path thing, so that's what's making that logic work for me in this case. But you can imagine your code branching different ways. You need to handle those scenarios slightly different. Like, do they give me a file? Like, do they do get child item and pass that in versus here's the path to this thing to test. So, oh no, my demo closed. All right, so we run, invoke Pester on that guy. And he beautifully passed all my tests. Here's also a scenario where my first test was not inside of a context, but the second set was. So I'm basically saying, here's my generic test I need to run first. And my context is I'm testing these basic features. And it did the auto nesting for me. So then, new shortcut. Okay, so that was the get shortcut. If you're moving into like modules, And maybe it's worth me doing a full talk on those. But a common structure is like you create a folder for the module with a PSC1, PSM1, and maybe having Pester tests here. Or this is an old pattern I used to use quite a bit, where I'd always put my tests next to my functions I was testing. Because then when I get the rid of the module, I just do invoke Pester, and it runs everywhere and finds them and executes them. So that's, I suppose I should call that out. When you run invoke Pester without any parameters, he'll actually walk the file structure and run any tests you have specified. You have the option to add tags to your tests. So you can call invoke Pester with this tag, and it'll run just those tests that are tagged that specific way. So in a scenario like
That's in a folder path too, I think.
Yeah.
You're talking about walking the structure again.
so on the describe, here I can do tag, like integration or build. Actually, at Collapse I use a build tag or local integration. So basically, I only want one on my local versus running remotely. Nope, go right ahead. Thank you for joining us. Like I said, February will be our next session. Right. Yep, thank you. So to during my CI, my build for in TFS, it's my stuff that I have tagged as build that will run. And I have local integration that will only run on my local box, because I generally have to do some general environment setup and prep. And then I don't have any actual integration tests yet, but I got that in the pipeline to where I should get all my modules together, run everybody's integration tests to see them all kind of work healthy before I publish or things like that. So my demo test, I just want to point out this is a common structure. So what I do now is I actually have a separate folder called tests, and all my tests live in there. I think if we found profile, I keep jumping over to this VS. Nope. So now all my tests sit here. I still have the rule of thumb that the name matches the function they're testing. And the reason why, actually, I'll demo it off here instead of my local demo, but I actually have a test in here now that says somewhere that all my public commands have Pester tests. So if I add a new function to my module, this test will fail until I add a test for that function. So that's my way of keeping me and my team honest, is that right away, new code is looking for a test. I don't care if it's a small one that says, like what if or does not throw type of a scenario, but getting the first test in there makes it easier to add the second and the third.
Could you like do something like with code coverage, like some sort of code coverage module that tests Pester?
Absolutely. You can call Pester with build test, Pester. I'm jumping into some of my module logic here, but by calling invoke Pester with the code coverage of what you want to actually cover, like my PSM1 in this case, he will run the code coverage metrics and tell me, do I cover like 10% of my code with tests or 90% of my code with tests? I've got some modules where I'm pushing like upwards of 90%. I got others where I don't dare turn that on because it won't cover hardly anything, right? So we did a major cutover at one point where we had this big repo full of code, and we started breaking it up and moving it into modules. But our first pass was just to move the code around, and we didn't take the time then to add the test and the validation and the code coverage, right? So I don't enforce code coverage on any existing modules. But on net new modules, once I get them bootstrapped and working, I find where their current threshold is, and I just set my code coverage like 10% lower than that. So if I onboard a module that's doing 40%, I'll say, let me keep at least 30% code coverage. That way, at least maintain some consistency across it. And I generally stop at like that 70% line because I think that's a really good number to have code coverage for. So that's I think, a more advanced feature, but if you want to look at build scripts for modules, my stuff here would be a good reference. I keep jumping into this VSO logging commands because he's my newest module I've published. So he has all my most recent code and ideas and logic built into them. My PS graph is usually my reference, but I haven't retrofitted some of those minor things into it yet. So while I'm in here, let's look at tests, project level, back to this module tests. This other set of tests, is this big enough? I'm actually running, where is it at here? So I'm getting all my script files, and I'm actually calling invoke script analyzer on them. So I'm on the fly, I'm creating statements that are basically testing the script analyzer passes on every piece of code I add. So now, add the new function, I gotta make sure I'm not using aliases in there. I'm not using weird parameter names. Like there's whatever the community PS script analyzer will validate against, this will check that for me. I do have a settings file that points to the rules that I validated against, which if I hop back out to the base of my project, is I manage my own script analyzer settings here. So if I have certain rules that I don't want ran in my environment, or more verbose ones enforced, I can customize them per module here. And I think for the most part, the use should process for state changing functions, like every time I call set or update, the analyzer rules want me to add the should continue or should process logic. Since this module is just doing string output, it didn't make any sense. So I globally said, I will happily ignore this one. And then I have two aliases that I whitelist, the where and the select. I feel like those are okay to use in scripts. That's my personal preference. So I've added my rules to whitelist those specifically. And then the last module test I want to point out is I also have help tests. So not only does this new function have to have its own test, has to pass script analyzer rules, I also check for comment-based help. So by adding new code, I'm expecting a description or a synopsis. I'm checking for an example in comment-based help, and I'm actually checking to make sure that the example has a call to that function name. So if you just create an empty example without calling this function that you use onboarding, or you rename the function, forget to rename your example, this will catch that for you. So this is my category of keeping myself honest. Like, I'm not unit testing. I'm not operational validation testing. I'm more keeping my syntax and best practices kind of enforced without having to really think about it. And then I also ask for my parameters to have descriptions on them as well. I can go either way on that one, but I think we decided to go ahead and enforce it here. So these are two tests, a couple sets of tests I drop in every module after I create one. It's checking these things for me. And then we net new going forward, we just keep everybody held to a higher standard and reflects well. So I think these demos are basically going to demo exactly that. And I'm going to skip over this section here. But so in this repo, I have a very robust set of tests that go even further. Like I know my this might be something worth looking through, I guess. I used to use this for all my modules, but I've got some good templating and stuff that I'm pretty consistent that I don't make small mistakes anymore. this would check for all the common little things I'd screw up all the time, and let me know that. Like there's things like, did I forget to create the root module? Like, does it exist? Does that module, is it valid PowerShell? Yes. Is the manifest there? Does the PSD1 reference the PSM1? Like, I'm doing all those little gotchas. Like every time something bit me, I said never again. I added a rule for it. And then this demo, if you did it on your own, you could start with an empty folder. And I hate how that closes on me. Demo. Where going through this, I create an empty folder, and then I run the tests. As I slowly make each test pass, I will eventually have a full valid module. Like I've gotten every step of the micro module in there that it ensures that it's consistent every time. So I'm going to fly past that because I think I've kind of gotten the weeds on quite a bit of those, and show maybe this guy here as I shifted to like operational validation. These here in this file are anonymized tests I have previously used someplace else. So these were scenarios in production I was checking or testing for these things, or my build environments. At least I think past this first one.
So this is testing DSC, right?
So DSC just his own set tests. So in a way, he does his own operational validation.
Yeah.
But this might be somebody that's like, say, you're transitioning into DSC, or you're doing a lot of manual setup, or you had an automated setup, but you still need to double check someone or something, right?
And DSC doesn't do that.
So DSC, I mean, in a way, DSC does that. If you use DSC to set up your system, it will tell you what all is currently in the desired state as a way to give you that the operational validation.
Right.
Absolutely. So if you were not using DSC and you had to install certain required features, I could build a list and literally just enumerate the list and test for it. So if you can't do DSC, maybe you can just write a Pester test to check several things for you. And there's scenarios where DSC doesn't make sense, like local workstation setup or desktop setup. Like that'd be a scenario where if you have a checklist of things, Pester can also like reference could be your checklist effectively. So, well, here I'm just looping over features. Just spot checking, right? Do I have the newest version of .NET, or a specific version in this case? Oh, no, that's greater than. So there's a greater than version there. Checking for hotfixes, like here's a list. I know that these systems have to have these hotfixes. I can just for each over those. I could use the test cases in this mode. When I was building these, I was using for each quite heavily. SQL. So SQL used to be really annoying. It would change your drive on you all the time. So I'd always say push location so that I could always pop back to it later without it messing with my drive, right? So here's a general config, right? Like this server, I had to have this folder on the system, D drive, scroll data. And these all feel like things that I would use DSC for today, right? Like today, I use DSC for quite a bit, and it makes this obsolete for my last two environments. SQL installed.
You could write Pester tests at all.
Exactly. So we have quite the DSC infrastructure here. We do have nightly Pester tests that tell us all of our servers are passing DSC, yes or no. So last time they successfully executed DSC, because there for a while we had some that would get like effectively stuck. So DSC would run and just never finish. So you'd have a window where it wasn't really enforcing anything because it was stuck in a run. And it wouldn't report that it was out of compliance or it was just one of those scenarios, right? So we had to test for it. And then we also test how old the configuration is, the moth. Like when was the last time we generated the moth for a server? And I think if we see servers drift more than, I think we're doing like like 45 days. We expect our MOS to be regenerated more often than that. We got enough active things happening so that when something does fall that far behind, we'll trigger those to be built out and reran. We patch outside of DSC. So the infrastructure leverages SCCM, and so we consume that client, and they actually push the patches to us. We on our Windows, our Azure Windows, we schedule the actual installation of those patches. So they'll pre-download them, and then we use 6 waves. Since we have lower environments, we have 3 waves working through like dev, QA, stage. We have a wave for basically other production services, like our build agents, all the stuff like Confluence, Jira, that I suppose the dev teams depend on. And then we have 2 separate waves for actual production where our services live. That way, we only take half down at a time, and we got those interlaced. So, and we have that, and it's pretty much almost a scheduled task, I guess. We use TFS to schedule it. So we have a release schedule in TFS that says at this time, run this, and then it will auto trigger our validation tests once it's done. So, so operational validation, right? If you could build tests that say your systems are up and running correctly, like maybe it's not what DSC is doing, but maybe it's that the services you've provided, the apps, are configured and running healthy. You know, DSC knows your website is running. It's not telling you you're getting a 500 error on that site, right? So there's this layer where Pester could step in and says, you know, maybe I do run Pester tests to validate my infrastructure. And the ideal scenario for that is we run our validation every night. So, but maybe it's just when you're doing your patching, right? Before you patch, run your validation so you have a known state. Perform your patch, run it again to know what you broke or didn't break. That really saves you when your first pass fails on something. You patch and it failed on the same thing because your test can tell you that, versus in production, you now see that it failed and you don't know how long has it been bad. Did my patches just break that thing? So knowing an operational validation before and after is a lifesaver in those scenarios. Pester will output various XML config files. So like NUnits and XUnit, yeah. Which, if you're using like a Jenkins or a TFS or whatever, it can consume those. And that's how we manage our reporting is we do Pester every night. TFS will ingest those results. And it has its own chart of all the results going back to the beginning of time. And what's nice about what TFS does for us is it will tell us this test has been failing since. Like it tells me when it first failed or when it's going up and down over a period of time. I can narrow in that test and TFS will give me that overall report. So basically everybody's just running a generic file and it's doing its thing. But skimming through this, I'm checking versions. You know, I'm literally like invoking SQL against the box too. Like select a version, I get it back. And there's things where I don't know if I should have DSC checking a version in this way, but the server name, accounts and access, SSRS. Let me jump something else like Active Directory. Like if you can bake it into a PowerShell scripts, you can wrap Pester around it and you get all that Pester offers. Here's a scenario where I was building out mini domains with certain OU structures and users. So it's one thing that I know when I built it, it was correct. But now it's been sitting out there for a while and people have had a chance to mess with it. And I know this structure was important. So I can then go back and see, okay, I know they broke it, what did they break? And the operational validation lets you narrow your focus really, really fast, right? Because all of a sudden you know this isn't in scope of a problem and this is in scope. Because, and on that note, write your tests to help give you that scope. Like I will, like hitting an endpoint, right? I will have a test that says, does my DNS resolve to an address? Can I make a TCP connection to that thing? Can I invoke a web request? Did I get a response, right? Those 4 tests, them failing at different points, gives you a whole bunch, tons of information, right? Like if you get a response back, but it's a 500 error, I know, I gotta get on the server right away, right? But if my DNS fails, that's a completely different team or different problems, you know, I gotta go down to, and I don't even have to worry about the server. I can't even talk to it. And if you do that granularity in your tests, like, and have that path to lock, or if you're in networking, the OSI model, like just give yourself tests that will narrow your scope as fast as possible. Testing our username. Like we manage accounts for all of our services. We have tests that, one, make sure the passwords and usernames that we have are still valid, that they aren't expired, and that's 2 or 3 other things. Those things that we're testing on those accounts that we know as soon as one of them goes down, that hopefully our tests tell us before production tells us. But fortunately, we actually have the dev QA stage pod environments, right? So hopefully we have enough scope that when problems arise, they happen in lower environments before they happen in prod. And as well, and that's where like our consistency. But building a list and walking it, right? It's, does this match server accounts? So I suppose, I mean, maybe some work to look through these tests to see if there's any that might be valuable or interesting in your scenarios. I think I've got one crazy one in this file somewhere. Administrator. Oh yeah, I'm even testing for Active Directory delegation. Have you ever had to think through scripting Active Directory delegation? Kind of a nightmare, and then writing tests for it to make sure that you're delegating it correctly. Like that's where this might, if you have to think down that, here's some samples of walking delegated information and testing various properties. And then, yeah, I think that's all. I mean, I've really covered the whole gambit of Pester in this. And hopefully I've kind of given you some of the ideas of where you would use it versus where you wouldn't. And like I said, I've been using it for at least 3 years now. In fact, I think I gave this talk 3 years ago. So it's been at least 3 years, a very similar talk to this. And I've never, anytime I've pushed for testing, more testing or validation, it's never let me down. You know, like my PS graph, I've got beautiful tests across the entire scope of the functions for creating graphs. And I've had times where I've refactored stuff and I'll see things fail that I didn't even imagine were related to that. And like even when I'm beginning, like you might be just writing your code and testing on the console, take that line, make that the test. Because you have your environment, you have all your variables set up, right? Like just make the test and run your Pester test on that. So when you loop back to this thing like 6 months from now, or you're changing something, you'll know right away if you broke it. And that's the beauty, is lots of coverage. I can have things that are dependent, I can change them and know that I didn't break anything. And that's where the value of tests come in.
Or to increment your module version by 1 if you did break something and you know you're about to break it.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, maybe your tests just tell you, hey, I definitely have breaking changes. Sometimes that's part of the plan. You bump your major version and communicate the idea like, hey, this is important enough to change. But you want to know that you're doing that intentionally versus the gotchas that slip in, slip past.
Did you break your cases as you're coding?
I think, so I'm getting pretty quick at coding out my functions now. So generally I'll be coding my function. I'll have like my main test case that I'm running over and over. I will make sure I save that as my actual Pester test. And he becomes my example. Like I may as well have my example that somebody can run. The same thing I'm testing. And I always like to have my examples. I always like to have at least one. It's like copy and pasteable.
Yeah.
Even if I copy and paste it and I tweak a couple things, there's no better guide than to say, you know, get help dash example, copy and run it, versus trying to like auto complete and then film the various properties. And like I said, and that's usually the one I have as my test case. And I might start, but I do have a shortcut for new Pester tests. Like if I do just new file, test function dot test dot ps1. Just gonna carefully capitalize this. I come in here, I just do autocomplete, and I get my basic structure here. So it's super fast for me to just drop in a test and run with it. Like I've already built my snippets to enable that workflow.
Is that a snippet that you recreated yourself?
It is. I'll drop this into the project and republish it. I published in my advanced one my advanced function snippet. And this guy is pulling from the file name, right? Like test function.test, it knows like, hey, there's this test. And so before we go, I've used what if quite a bit for my tests. Like sometimes I'll implement what if support just so I can call my test with what if to not do the dangerous thing and validate the rest of it, except for that one line, just to get code coverage. So yeah, I've implemented what if many times, and that saves me. Sometimes I don't have to mock certain things. There's ugly to mock. I'm like, you know what? I'll what if that. I'll call in the function. Doesn't throw. I'm good to go. Whew. All right, I got covered as much Pester as we probably covered tonight. Hopefully, you can walk away retaining some of that information. This is all online. I do not have a blog series on Pester, but I do know there's a Pester 101, Adam. He's got a lean pub that's a pretty thorough, in-depth walk of a lot of these features. Yeah, like I said, more tests. I've never been burned by having too many tests. All right, well, I will wrap up this meeting for right now. I suppose other announcements, I'm not gonna have a January user group because it's actually gonna fall like right on New Year's actually. So we will meet again in February. I haven't decided on a topic yet or reached out for anybody for that talk. I am. So tomorrow night, I'm presenting on my PS Graph module. There are a couple of videos on that one floating around. I will refresh it for tomorrow. It's the Raleigh Technology Park user group, which will probably meet about, how was it? I should know this, but it's 8:30 their time on the East Coast. So 5:30-ish, I think. Yeah. So it'll be more earlier in the day, but I think we're going to record that one as well. And then it's also the base of the talk I'll be doing at the PowerShell Summit. So I'm talking on my PS Graph at the Summit, but I need to step it up, I guess. Can't do the same demos I've been doing, but I've got some ideas. Yeah, so with that, be thinking of some ideas you guys might want to present. Like I said, 5-10 minutes. I haven't picked when we want to do that session yet, but I think bouncing ideas off each other, I think, and then I get offer you feedback on things you're working on as well, or insights, maybe. More than willing to help out through some of those things.
Another helpful idea, or at least thing I'd like to see, is I see everybody coming up with their automated labs that they can come up with. Where does that come from? How do you do that? There's all these modules on how to do it, and I'm sure they all leverage DSC and Hyper-V, but.
So for like this, the CI/CD for module building, or are you talking specifically?
Well, no, where it spins up a bunch of VMs.
Okay.
Or your test environment that you can go, break.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think, let's see, I think we alluded to that in some of our DSE stuff with AWS. Yeah, well, I'll see if we can pull something together along those lines. I don't have any demos in my pocket that do a lot of setup.
Yeah.
And haven't had to do that in a while. So.
I know Lability is a big one, and there's something called Auto Lab or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just something that's like, I've been trying to refresh our old server 2008, basically get rid of our old server 2008 machines and turn up server 2016 machines, but I want to use DSC, so I want to test it and make sure everything's good first, but it's the chicken and egg problem, DSC full server, well, that requires Active Directory, so I want to turn up Active Directory using DSC. Yeah, chicken and egg.
No, absolutely.
Maybe you can use ARM templates or something? You're on Azure?
It's all local. It's all
Um,
on servers, but VMs are VMs. I don't care. It's like on the test side of things, I don't care what hypervisor it is. It's just
yeah. So I think the gut response there might be like a Vagrant might also be a popular piece into that ecosystem, anyways.
I just didn't know how people did that. I mean, I see videos and things like that, even from like Don Jones on MBA and stuff like that, but those are all from 2012 using, stuff that I go look at, and it's like, it hasn't been updated in 5 years. So.
Yeah. So what happened in the past? Like here we are, stuff pretty robust now, and we got multiple environments to test stuff through. But previously, I'd use my tooling to just do a generic VM deployment with nothing running, and then I tend to like snapshot it, and then I basically have my thing revert the snapshot and load my stuff. Like that was my cycle to test and validate in those scenarios. But that was never more than like a single machine type of a deployment setup. Cool. Yeah. Well, any other feedback? I definitely appreciate it. I think that's like all the content I had for tonight. Like I said, I got this streaming on YouTube, so it's posted. And I think I've got an old series from like 3 years ago where I probably go a little bit more in depth in various sections of this that I based this talk off of. And I suppose, yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.